2005, Connecticut. When the famous playwright Arthur Miller died, his heirs opened a private safe in his home and were shocked. Inside were hundreds of pages of letters, diaries, and personal notes. Most were about Marilyn Monroe. Miller had allowed these documents to be released after his death, as if he wanted to clear his conscience. The letters revealed the true face of his marriage to Marilyn, not the intellectual love story reflected to Hollywood. On the contrary, it was a relationship full of control, manipulation, and emotional abuse. The most striking confession was this: "When Marilyn woke up crying every night, instead of comforting her, I took notes, because she was perfect material for my new play." Miller didn't love Marilyn, he studied her, and this truth was hidden for 50 years. The letters also described Marilyn's suicide attempts, how they hid her drug addiction, and why Miller really left her. This wasn't just a divorce story, this was the collapse of one of Hollywood's biggest lies. If you want to follow this story, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because Arthur Miller's confessions reveal the most disturbing truths about Marilyn Monroe. Arthur Miller and Marilyn Monroe first met in 1951. At the time, Miller was a famous playwright with works like Death of a Salesman and The Crucible, one of the most respected names in American theater. Marilyn was a rising Hollywood star, an actress known for her beauty but not taken seriously. Their first meeting was at a Hollywood party. Miller showed interest in Marilyn, but he was married at the time and the relationship remained platonic. Marilyn was impressed by Miller. Finally, she'd found someone who appreciated her for her intelligence, not just her body, or so she thought. In the following years, they met occasionally but didn't have a close relationship. Miller lived in New York and was married to Mary Slattery. Marilyn was building her career in Los Angeles. In 1954, she married Joe DiMaggio, but the marriage lasted 9 months. In 1955, Marilyn moved to New York to take acting classes at the Actors Studio, and thus her paths crossed with Miller again. This time it was different. Miller's marriage had collapsed, and his interest in Marilyn had taken on a romantic nature. Marilyn was in love with Miller. She wanted to be with him, to be taken seriously, and to be accepted intellectually. In early 1956, Miller divorced his wife, officially for political reasons, the Schuich investigation and communism accusations, but in reality the Marilyn factor was significant. In June 1956, Miller and Marilyn got married. The world celebrated this marriage, beauty and brains, Hollywood and Broadway, icon and intellectual. But the reality was much darker. Miller and Marilyn's honeymoon was spent in England. Marilyn was going to film The Prince and the Showgirl there. The first few days seemed happy, but then something happened. Marilyn found Miller's diary in the hotel room. She gave in to her curiosity and read it, and what she read devastated her. In his diary, Miller had written his doubts about Marilyn. He talked about how the marriage might be a mistake, how Marilyn disappointed him intellectually. For Marilyn, this was heartbreaking. Marilyn confronted Miller. She cried, asked questions, demanded an explanation. Miller went on the defensive. He said these were just doubts, that everyone sometimes has hesitations, but the damage was done. Marilyn's trust in Miller was shaken, and this trust was never fully rebuilt. Marilyn would later tell friends, "The day I read Arthur's diary, our marriage ended. But we continued for 5 more years." This was a tragic truth. In letters found after Miller's death, there were writings about this incident. Marilyn read my diary and was very upset, but I had only written my honest thoughts. A writer must be honest. Marilyn didn't understand that. This defense summarized Miller's view of Marilyn: patronizing, self-justifying, and lacking empathy. In the first year of marriage, Miller tried to fix Marilyn. He recommended books, tried to include her in intellectual discussions, criticized her behavior. Marilyn did everything she could to please Miller. She read Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Hemingway. She tried to talk about politics. She even converted to Judaism at Miller's request. But in Miller's eyes, nothing was enough. In Miller's letters, there were striking confessions about this period. Marilyn is trying to read Dostoevsky, but she doesn't understand it. When I explain it to her, I feel like I'm teaching a little child. Elsewhere, Marilyn is trying to be intellectual, but she's superficial by nature. I wonder if I can make her deeper. This patronizing attitude continued throughout the marriage. In 1957, Marilyn became pregnant. She was very happy. Finally, she would be a mother. But the pregnancy ended in miscarriage. Marilyn was devastated. She needed Miller's support, but Miller was emotionally distant. In his letters he wrote, "Marilyn had a miscarriage and is very sad. I'm sad too, but also relieved. A baby wouldn't help our careers right now." This cold calculation showed Miller's priorities. In 1958, Marilyn became pregnant again. This time she was more careful. She rested, went to doctors regularly. She was hopeful, but she miscarried again. This time Marilyn's depression was much deeper. Her drug use increased. Her sleep pattern was disrupted. She became unable to work. Miller observed this situation and took notes. In his letters, Marilyn wakes up crying every night. She says, "Nobody really loves me." I try to comfort her, but a voice inside me says how interesting this psychological state is. This confession showed the essence of Miller's view of Marilyn. He saw Marilyn not as a human being, but as a study object. Marilyn's pain didn't trigger empathy in Miller. It aroused curiosity, and this curiosity fed his creativity. Miller observed and recorded all of Marilyn's depression, relationship problems, and drug addiction, because these were valuable material for his future plays. In late 1958, Marilyn attempted suicide. She took too many pills and passed out. Miller found her. His first reaction was to call an ambulance, but then he stopped, because there would be a scandal. If Hollywood found out, Marilyn's career could end. And if Marilyn's career ended, the benefit Miller derived from Marilyn would also end. So he waited. In his letters he wrote, "I found Marilyn motionless in bed. She was breathing, but I couldn't wake her. I thought about calling an ambulance, but the media scandal would be too big. I waited until morning. When she woke up in the morning, she didn't remember anything. This was a terrible decision, but Miller justified it." In 1960, Miller wrote the screenplay for The Misfits. Officially, this was a gift for Marilyn, to give her a serious role, to help her prove her acting. But in reality, this was exploitation of Marilyn's pain. The main character in the screenplay, Rosalind, was clearly based on Marilyn, fragile, emotionally unstable, dependent on men. Miller took Marilyn's most private moments, her deepest fears, and turned them into a character. When Marilyn read the screenplay, she was shocked. She saw herself there, but portrayed mercilessly. Her character was weak, helpless, and pathological. She confronted Miller. Miller said this was art, that writers always write from their own experiences. But Marilyn felt betrayed. Miller was exhibiting her most intimate moments, her most vulnerable states to the world without her permission. The filming of the movie was a disaster. Marilyn was emotionally devastated. Her drug use was out of control. She came to the set late or didn't come at all. Miller treated her coldly on set. Both knew their marriage was over, but they had to continue until the film was completed. In Miller's letters, "Marilyn has become unbearable on set, but I need to manage her until the film is finished. Then I'll leave." In late 1960 and early 1961, Marilyn's condition worsened. Suicide attempts became more frequent. Sometimes they were intentional, sometimes accidental. She was taking so many pills that she no longer knew what she was doing. During this period, Miller was closely monitoring Marilyn, but not for her health, to ensure she didn't die. Because if Marilyn died at home, Miller could be blamed. This was one of the most disturbing confessions in Miller's letters. "I keep vigil all night to stop Marilyn's suicide attempts. I check every 2 hours to see if she's still breathing. But I'm not doing this out of love. I don't want to lose her because her death would fall on me. People would blame me. My career would end." This cold calculation showed Miller's true motivation. In January 1961, Miller and Marilyn officially divorced. The divorce was devastating for Marilyn. She was in love with Miller and believed their relationship would work. But Miller was done. Immediately after the divorce, he started a relationship with another woman, photographer Inge Morath. Within months, they were engaged. For Marilyn, this was the final blow. Miller hadn't just left her, he'd immediately moved on with someone else. On August 4, 1962, Marilyn Monroe died. Miller learned the news the next day. His reaction was surprisingly unemotional. He didn't attend her funeral. He only made a brief statement. In his letters he wrote, "When I learned Marilyn died, I was sad but not surprised. She had been dying for years. It was only a matter of time." This cold assessment showed how superficial Miller's emotional connection to Marilyn was. But then Miller did something. He started writing about Marilyn. Articles, interviews, eventually biographical books, and in each piece he portrayed himself as the victim. He depicted Marilyn as a difficult woman, emotionally unstable, drug-addicted, unreliable. He presented himself as the patient, supportive, suffering husband. This version was accepted for decades because Miller was a respected writer and Marilyn was dead. The dead have no defense. Arthur Miller died on February 10, 2005, at age 89. In his will, he specified that his private letters and diaries could be reviewed by the family after his death. Perhaps he felt guilty. Perhaps he wanted the truth to come out. Or maybe it was one last manipulation, an attempt to control the story even after death. When the letters were examined, the true nature of his relationship with Marilyn was revealed. It was a cold, calculating, exploitative relationship. Miller hadn't loved Marilyn, he'd used her. For creative inspiration, for career opportunities, for ego gratification. Marilyn's pain was Miller's material. Marilyn's fragility was Miller's advantage. In 2010, Miller's son published some of these letters. The public was shocked. For years they'd believed Miller's version. But now the truth was coming out. Miller wasn't a villain, but he was cold, egotistical, and manipulative. He'd harmed Marilyn and he knew it. But he wasn't sorry, because Marilyn had given him such valuable material. Miller's personal diaries were even more disturbing than the letters. Because the diaries weren't written for anyone, they were just Miller's own records. And these records showed a cold, clinical approach to Marilyn. Miller took notes about Marilyn almost every day. Sleep hours, drug use, mood changes, sexual behaviors, everything was recorded, as if Marilyn was a test subject and Miller was the scientist studying her. A diary entry from 1957, Marilyn woke up at 11 this morning. The first thing she did was take Nembutal. She didn't eat breakfast. She cried in the afternoon, doesn't know why. She called Joe DiMaggio in the evening. They talked for a long time. At night she hugged me and asked, "Do you love me?" I said yes, but I'm not actually sure what I feel right now. This entry showed Miller's emotional distance from Marilyn. Marilyn was seeking love. Miller was making observations. Another entry from 1958. Marilyn's drug use has reached worrying levels. She's taking 30-40 pills a day. I told her doctors, but they're helpless too. I told Marilyn she needs to reduce the pills, but she screamed and cried. She said, "You don't understand me." She might be right. I don't understand her, and maybe I don't want to. Because understanding means getting involved. I just want to observe. This confession showed Miller was consciously maintaining emotional distance. One of the most disturbing records was about Marilyn's sleep-talking. Miller would listen to what Marilyn said while she slept and record it. Marilyn talks in her sleep, mostly unintelligible things, but sometimes she forms clear sentences. She says, "Mom, don't leave me." She says, "Nobody loves me." She says, "I want to die." These expressions are coming from the depths of her subconscious, very valuable material. Miller was exploiting even his wife's most vulnerable moments. In 1956, Marilyn Monroe converted to Judaism. The official reason was to show respect to Miller's family and ensure religious unity in the marriage. But in reality, this was an indication of Miller's control over Marilyn. Marilyn had no religious faith. In fact, because she grew up in multiple different families in her childhood, she was confused about religion. But she became Jewish to please Miller. In Miller's letters, he wrote about this conversion. Marilyn is taking Judaism classes. She meets regularly with the rabbi. But I'm not sure she really understands it. She just wants to make me happy. And I'm taking advantage of that. because Marilyn being Jewish is important for my family and community. This showed how Miller exploited Marilyn's sacrifice. Marilyn took the Judaism classes seriously. She worked for hours with Rabbi Robert Goldberg, tried to learn Hebrew, did readings about Jewish traditions. But Miller never fully appreciated this effort. In his letters, Marilyn is trying to be Jewish, but it's like a costume for her. She can't truly internalize it, but at least she's trying, and that's enough for me. This patronizing attitude reflected the essence of Miller's view of Marilyn. In Miller's diaries, there were also detailed notes about his sexual relationship with Marilyn, and these notes showed that even the sexual relationship was a power play. Miller tried to control, shape, and even criticize Marilyn's sexuality. A diary entry: Marilyn is very eager sexually, but also insecure. She constantly seeks approval from me. She asks, "Am I good? Do you want me?" I tell her I want her, but inside I wish she was less needy. Her dependence bothers me. In this entry, Miller was uncomfortable with Marilyn's emotional needs. Elsewhere, Marilyn uses sexuality to receive love, as if her body is the only currency with which she can buy love. This is sad but also interesting. Why do some women behave this way? Maybe childhood trauma, maybe social pressures, a topic worth researching. Miller even viewed his wife's sexual behavior as an academic curiosity. The most disturbing record was this: sometimes during our sexual relations with Marilyn, I feel her mind is elsewhere, as if her body is there but not her soul. She dissociates. I told her this, but she denied it. But I know, and I'm thinking of using this situation in a character in my new play. Miller was turning even the most intimate moments into material. There was one figure that constantly followed Miller like a shadow in his relationship with Marilyn: Joe DiMaggio. Marilyn's ex-husband maintained a close relationship with Marilyn even after their divorce. Marilyn frequently called DiMaggio, met with him, and trusted him. This situation bothered Miller, but the reason wasn't jealousy, it was fear of losing control. In Miller's letters, Marilyn called Joe again today. They talked for an hour on the phone. I don't know what they talked about, but Marilyn seemed calmer afterwards. This bothers me, because I can't give her that calm. Joe can reach a part of Marilyn that I can't, and this shows my inadequacy. This confession revealed Miller's insecurity. DiMaggio truly loved Marilyn, with unconditional, passionate, protective love. Miller loved Marilyn conditionally, only as long as she was useful, as long as she was interesting, as long as the cost was low. Marilyn knew this difference. She told friends, "Joe loves me as I am. Arthur loves me as he wants me to be." This distinction explained everything. In 1961, when Miller and Marilyn divorced, the first person to pick up Marilyn from the hospital was DiMaggio, not Miller. Miller had chosen to remain distant during Marilyn's mental breakdown, but DiMaggio was immediately by her side. When Marilyn died, it was DiMaggio who arranged her funeral. Miller didn't even come, and for the next 20 years it was DiMaggio who sent flowers to Marilyn's grave every week. Miller wrote books and made money. Miller's marriage to Marilyn wasn't his only marriage. He was married to Mary Slattery before and married Inge Morath after. And comparing these relationships showed more clearly how Miller treated Marilyn. His marriage to Mary Slattery was calm and stable. Mary supported Miller's career, took care of the children, and wasn't demanding. In his letters about Mary, Miller wrote, "Mary was a good wife. She understood me, supported me, and didn't ask for much. But she was boring. She didn't stimulate me intellectually. Marilyn, on the other hand, was a challenge every day." Miller found Mary's stability boring, but found Marilyn's chaos exciting, because chaos fed his creativity. His marriage to Inge Morath was stable again. Inge was a talented photographer but didn't overshadow Miller's career. She was calm, supportive, and independent. Miller stayed married to Inge for 40 years, only 5 with Marilyn. This showed what kind of relationship Miller really wanted, one he could control, non-threatening, easy. Marilyn was none of these. She was uncontrollable, threatening, with her fame, her beauty, her fragility, difficult. But at the same time, she gave Miller creative inspiration, and Miller found this inspiration worth exploiting for 5 years. Then, after Marilyn was exhausted and no longer useful, he left her. In 1964, 2 years after Marilyn's death, Miller wrote the play After the Fall. The play was clearly based on Marilyn. The main character, Maggie, was a famous actress, beautiful but unstable, successful but unhappy. The play told the journey to Maggie's suicide, and in this journey Miller portrayed himself as the victim, the man who tried to save Maggie but failed. When the play was staged, the public was shocked. This was very clearly about Marilyn. But Marilyn was dead and couldn't defend herself. Miller had taken Marilyn's most private moments, her darkest times, and turned them into a public spectacle. And he did this without Marilyn's permission, only 2 years after Marilyn's death. Critics harshly criticized Miller. One wrote, "Miller is exploiting his wife's body before it's even cold. This isn't art, it's vampirism." Another, "After the Fall is a man's attempt to clear his conscience, but it actually deepens his guilt." Miller defended himself against the criticism. He said it wasn't autobiographical, it was a universal story, but no one believed him. In Miller's private letters, he wrote about the play, "Writing After the Fall was a catharsis. I had to process my relationship with Marilyn, and the only way to do that was to write. Yes, the play is based on Marilyn, but this is my right. I lived it, so I can write about it." This defense summarized Miller's view of Marilyn. He had experienced Marilyn's experiences, so he could own and sell them. When reading Miller's letters, a question arises. Was Miller sorry? Did he feel guilty about what he did to Marilyn? The answer is complex. In some letters, signs of regret appear. He writes, "I could have treated Marilyn better. I could have taken her pain more seriously." But then he immediately justifies himself. "But I was suffering too. Living with Marilyn was very hard. She exhausted me too." This justification repeats throughout the letters. Miller acknowledges what he did to Marilyn, but then immediately mentions Marilyn's difficulties, as if Marilyn being difficult justified Miller's bad behavior. But in reality, this logic was wrong. Marilyn's difficulties didn't justify Miller's coldness, manipulation, or exploitation. The closest expression of regret was this: "When Marilyn died, I was sad that I couldn't save her. But then I realized it wasn't my job to save her. She needed to save herself. I was just a husband, not a savior." Even this statement placed responsibility on Marilyn. Until the end, Miller said that Marilyn was responsible for her own fate. But the truth was, Miller had harmed Marilyn's fate. When Arthur Miller died in 2005, he was remembered as one of the giants of American theater. Death of a Salesman, The Crucible, A View from the Bridge, classics. But now, after his letters emerged, his legacy is seen in a different light. He wasn't just a talented writer, he was also a man who exploited his wife, turned her pain into material, and then played the victim. Marilyn Monroe, in Miller's narrative, was portrayed for years as a tragic victim, a victim of her own weaknesses, addictions, and traumas. But the letters reveal another truth. Marilyn was Miller's victim, a victim of emotional manipulation, intellectual patronization, and creative exploitation. Marilyn was strong. She knew how Miller was using her and tried to resist, but in the end, the power imbalance was too great. Today, when we look at the story of Arthur Miller and Marilyn Monroe, we should see two things. First, the existence of intellectual abuse, not physical but just as harmful. Second, Marilyn's strength. She was harmed but never completely broken. She told friends the truth, she resisted, and she didn't lose hope. And this, perhaps, is Marilyn's true legacy. She wasn't just beautiful, she was also strong, smart, and aware. Miller tried to manipulate her, but until the end, Marilyn was herself.